The story of the Crusades has long been told as a tale of men in armor, of kings and knights driven by faith, ambition, and steel. Chronicles, paintings, and modern retellings reinforce the same image repeatedly: armies marching east under the sign of the cross, swords raised, banners flying, history forged through open conflict. Yet this familiar narrative, powerful as it appears, is deeply incomplete. It presents a version of history that values visible violence while ignoring the invisible systems that made that violence possible. Beneath the clash of armies existed another realm of power, quieter but no less decisive, operating through wealth, lineage, governance, faith, and memory. Noblewomen occupied the very center of that hidden realm. They were not spectators to the Crusades, nor merely victims of events beyond their control. They were administrators, financiers, diplomats, regents, patrons, and ideological architects. Their influence did not require armor or command on the battlefield, because medieval power did not depend solely on physical presence in war. Power was exercised through land, law, inheritance, marriage, spiritual authority, and continuity. In all these domains, noblewomen were indispensable. This documentary does not seek to diminish the role of men in the Crusades, nor to romanticize the past. Instead, it seeks to restore balance to a historical narrative that has systematically minimized half of medieval society. By examining the Crusades through the lives and actions of noblewomen, we uncover a deeper truth: the holy wars were not sustained by swords alone, but by a vast and complex structure of support, much of it built, managed, and preserved by women whose names history often failed to record. To understand the Crusades fully, one must move beyond the battlefield and into the halls of estates, the chambers of regents, the treasuries of noble households, and the spiritual institutions that gave the wars meaning. Only there does the unseen architecture of crusading power finally come into view. The idea that the Crusades were exclusively male enterprises collapses under careful examination. Medieval society functioned through interdependent roles, and noblewomen were woven deeply into every structure that sustained warfare. While men often departed for years at a time to fight in distant lands, women remained behind to ensure that the political, economic, and social foundations of their realms did not crumble. This was not a secondary responsibility. It was the difference between stability and collapse. Noblewomen governed estates that fed armies, managed legal disputes, collected revenues, and enforced feudal obligations. In many cases, they ruled alone as husbands, sons, or brothers left on crusade or died abroad. These women were not temporary caretakers. Some governed for decades, exercising authority that rivaled or exceeded that of the men whose absence made their rule necessary. Their decisions affected taxation, land distribution, alliances, and internal security, all of which directly influenced the ability of crusading forces to continue their campaigns. The misconception that women were confined to domestic life arises largely from the way medieval chroniclers chose to write history. Most were clerics or court historians whose priorities lay in recording battles, treaties, and royal decrees. Administrative continuity, estate management, and long-term governance were rarely celebrated, even though they were essential. Noblewomen operated within legal frameworks that granted them rights over property, inheritance, and guardianship, particularly as widows. These rights translated into real power, not symbolic influence. Furthermore, noblewomen served as anchors of legitimacy. Feudal authority depended on lineage, continuity, and recognition. A noblewoman represented the living connection between generations, ensuring that claims to land and title remained intact while wars disrupted the male line. In this sense, they were not peripheral figures but the custodians of political identity itself. The Crusades demanded enormous sacrifice, not only from those who fought but from those who sustained the societies they left behind. Noblewomen absorbed that burden. They maintained order, resolved conflicts, and ensured that the crusading project did not destroy the very societies that launched it. Without their governance, the holy wars would have collapsed under the weight of their own disruption. The Crusades were fueled not only by belief, but by an immense and continuous flow of resources. To march thousands of men across continents required far more than enthusiasm or faith. Horses had to be bred and maintained, weapons forged and replaced, ships built and hired, food stored and transported, fortifications constructed and defended. Every crusading expedition represented an enormous financial gamble, one that could bankrupt entire noble families if mismanaged. Within this economic reality, noblewomen emerged as some of the most powerful financial actors of the medieval world. Medieval law, though restrictive in many areas, granted noblewomen significant authority over property and wealth. Through dowries, inheritances, and widowhood rights, women often controlled vast estates that generated steady income. When men took the cross, they frequently transferred control of lands and revenues to their wives, either formally through legal instruments or informally through necessity. In practice, this meant that noblewomen became the primary managers of the economic engines that sustained crusading efforts. They decided which lands could be mortgaged, which revenues could be redirected to war, and which assets had to be preserved to ensure long-term survival. Dowries alone represented enormous concentrations of wealth. These were not symbolic gifts but substantial transfers of land, coin, and legal rights. In many cases, a crusading knight's ability to equip himself depended entirely on his wife's dowry. Some noblewomen went further, selling or pledging portions of their own inheritance to fund not just one man, but entire contingents. Their financial decisions determined how many soldiers could be armed, how long an expedition could last, and whether reinforcements could be sent when initial plans failed. Widowhood amplified this power. The death rates of crusading expeditions were high, and many women found themselves in sole control of estates spanning multiple regions. As widows, they were legally autonomous in ways unmarried women were not. They negotiated loans, resolved debts, and managed long-term investments with a level of authority that rivaled male lords. Some became repeat financiers of crusading ventures, supporting successive expeditions over decades. Their wealth did not merely enable war, it stabilized the fragile economies disrupted by prolonged conflict. Beyond direct funding, noblewomen played a crucial role through strategic endowments. They donated land and resources to monasteries, churches, hospitals, and military orders that formed the logistical backbone of the Crusades. These institutions provided food, medical care, shelter, and spiritual support to crusaders moving across Europe and the Eastern Mediterranean. Endowments ensured prayers for success, but they also guaranteed practical assistance. A monastery endowed by a noblewoman could become a supply hub for passing armies, while a hospital she founded might treat wounded soldiers returning from the front. Military orders, in particular, depended heavily on sustained patronage. The Knights Templar and the Hospitallers required continuous funding to maintain their fortresses, fleets, and administrative networks. Noblewomen were among their most reliable benefactors. Through gifts of land and money, women secured protection for their families, spiritual prestige, and long-term influence within these powerful organizations. In some cases, entire fortifications in the Holy Land can be traced back to resources originally controlled or donated by women. Financial power also translated into political leverage. A noblewoman who financed an expedition gained influence over its leadership and objectives. She could favor certain commanders, insist on protections for her lands, or redirect resources if circumstances changed. This influence was rarely recorded in chronicles, but it was deeply felt by those who depended on her support. Crusading leaders understood that without continued funding from noble households, their campaigns would fail. The economic reality of the Crusades reveals a simple but often ignored truth: wars are sustained by those who control resources, not merely by those who wield weapons. Noblewomen stood at the heart of this system. Their wealth paid for ships that crossed seas, for walls that defended cities, and for armies that marched under the cross. Without their financial stewardship, the Crusades would have remained isolated bursts of enthusiasm rather than prolonged, multi-generational conflicts that reshaped continents. In controlling land and money, noblewomen controlled time itself. They ensured continuity, transforming individual crusading vows into enduring movements. Their power did not shine on the battlefield, but it echoed through every campaign that survived beyond its first year. Political power during the Crusades did not reside solely in councils of war or royal courts filled with armored men. It moved quietly through bloodlines, marriages, correspondence, and familial obligation. Noblewomen stood at the center of this diplomatic world, serving as living connections between territories, dynasties, and cultures. Their influence was not accidental, nor merely symbolic. It was structural, embedded in the very way medieval politics functioned. Marriage was the most powerful diplomatic tool of the age, and noblewomen were its essential agents. Through arranged unions, women linked kingdoms and noble houses across Europe and the Levant. A single marriage could transform enemies into allies, secure safe passage for armies, or guarantee reinforcements for distant campaigns. These alliances dictated where crusading armies could travel, which ports were open to them, and which rulers would provide support or resistance. Far from being passive participants, many noblewomen actively negotiated the terms of their marriages, ensuring protections for their lands, their children, and their political standing. Once married, their diplomatic role did not end. Noblewomen maintained correspondence across borders, preserving relationships between families separated by war and distance. Letters carried news, intelligence, requests for aid, and warnings of political shifts. Through these networks, women acted as informal diplomats, shaping decisions long before they reached official councils. Information, in a world without rapid communication, was a form of power, and noblewomen controlled its flow with remarkable effectiveness. The absence of men due to crusading campaigns further expanded female authority. When kings, counts, and lords departed for the Holy Land, governance did not pause. Noblewomen ruled as regents, exercising full authority over territories that ranged from small counties to entire kingdoms. As regents, they collected taxes, administered justice, raised armies for defense, and negotiated with neighboring powers. Their decisions determined whether a realm remained stable or descended into chaos during prolonged absences. These regencies were not ceremonial. Noblewomen faced rebellions, external threats, and economic crises, often simultaneously. Their ability to maintain order ensured that crusading states had secure homelands to return to. A failed regency could mean the loss of lands, titles, and influence, rendering any success abroad meaningless. In this sense, the survival of crusading ambitions depended heavily on the political competence of women who remained behind. Familial networks extended this influence even further. Noblewomen were often related to multiple ruling houses through birth and marriage, creating webs of loyalty that crossed political and cultural boundaries. A sister in one court, a daughter in another, and a cousin in a distant crusader state could collectively influence decisions across continents. These networks facilitated negotiations, mediated disputes, and sometimes prevented conflicts that would have weakened the broader crusading effort. In the Levant, noblewomen also played key roles in sustaining crusader states. Marriages between European and local elites helped legitimize foreign rule and stabilize fragile territories. Women acted as cultural intermediaries, navigating differences in language, custom, and law. Their presence lent continuity to settlements that might otherwise have collapsed under constant military pressure. Diplomacy in the medieval world rarely followed clear, written protocols. It relied on trust, reputation, and personal relationships. Noblewomen excelled in this environment. Their ability to balance loyalty to family, faith, and territory made them indispensable political actors. While chroniclers focused on treaties signed by men, the groundwork for those agreements was often laid by women whose influence moved quietly through private chambers rather than public halls. Through marriage, regency, and familial networks, noblewomen shaped the political landscape of the Crusades. They determined alliances, stabilized realms, and preserved lines of communication that kept the crusading world connected. Their diplomacy did not wear armor, but it carried consequences as decisive as any battle. The Crusades were not sustained by military force alone. They were driven by belief, justified through theology, and maintained by a shared sense of divine purpose. Faith transformed warfare into sacred duty, turning violence into devotion and sacrifice into salvation. Within this spiritual framework, noblewomen played a profound and often underestimated role. Their influence extended deeply into the religious and ideological foundations that made the Crusades possible and meaningful to medieval society. Noblewomen were among the most visible and respected expressions of piety in the medieval world. Their devotion was not confined to private prayer but expressed publicly through patronage, ritual, and institutional support. As members of elite households, their religious choices set examples for entire regions. When a noblewoman endorsed a crusading cause, supported a monastery, or aligned herself with a particular religious figure, her actions carried moral weight that extended far beyond her personal faith. Many noblewomen maintained direct relationships with high-ranking clergy, including bishops, abbots, and, in some cases, the papacy itself. These relationships were built through correspondence, donations, and shared spiritual goals. Through such connections, women influenced the language used to describe crusading efforts, reinforcing the idea of the wars as acts of divine obedience rather than political expansion. Their support helped legitimize calls to arms and sustain the moral authority of crusading rhetoric at times when enthusiasm might otherwise have waned. Founding and supporting religious institutions was one of the most significant ways noblewomen shaped crusading ideology. They established convents, monasteries, hospitals, and pilgrimage sites that formed the spiritual infrastructure of the crusading movement. These institutions served multiple functions. They offered prayers for crusaders, cared for the wounded and poor, sheltered pilgrims traveling to and from the Holy Land, and preserved the narrative of the Crusades as a holy mission blessed by God. Each foundation reinforced the spiritual ecosystem that allowed the wars to continue across generations. Hospitals and charitable institutions founded by noblewomen were especially critical. Crusading produced immense human suffering, not only on battlefields but across entire regions affected by prolonged conflict. By funding care for the sick, injured, and displaced, noblewomen helped maintain public support for the crusading cause. Compassion and charity softened the brutal realities of war, allowing society to reconcile violence with Christian ideals. In this way, noblewomen contributed to the moral sustainability of the Crusades. Cultural patronage further amplified their influence. Noblewomen sponsored religious art, poetry, and literature that celebrated crusading ideals. Chansons de geste, devotional texts, and commemorative works presented crusaders as heroes of faith and framed their struggles within a divine narrative. These cultural productions shaped how ordinary people understood the wars, transforming distant conflicts into shared spiritual experiences. Through patronage, noblewomen influenced how the Crusades were remembered, praised, and justified. Some noblewomen also participated directly in shaping religious discourse by promoting specific interpretations of suffering, sacrifice, and redemption. Their own experiences of loss, husbands, sons, and brothers who never returned, were integrated into a broader theology of martyrdom and reward. This personal dimension gave crusading ideology emotional depth and credibility, reinforcing its hold on medieval consciousness. The authority noblewomen exercised in religious matters did not depend on formal positions within the church, which were largely closed to them. Instead, it emerged from their role as patrons, exemplars of piety, and guardians of spiritual continuity. Their faith was not passive, it was active, strategic, and deeply intertwined with power. By shaping institutions, narratives, and moral frameworks, noblewomen acted as spiritual architects of the Crusades. They helped define not only why the wars were fought, but how they were understood, endured, and remembered. Without their ideological support, the Crusades would have struggled to maintain the religious legitimacy that sustained them for centuries. The influence of noblewomen during the Crusades did not end with the final battles or the gradual collapse of Crusader states in the Levant. Their impact extended far beyond the medieval period, shaping political structures, religious institutions, and cultural memory in ways that continued to influence Europe and the wider world for centuries. Yet this influence remained largely unacknowledged, buried beneath narratives that favored visible acts of war over the quieter forces that sustained it. To understand the true legacy of the Crusades, it is necessary to confront these historical blind spots and recognize the enduring consequences of women's hidden power. The administrative systems developed and maintained by noblewomen during prolonged absences of male rulers contributed to the evolution of governance in medieval Europe. Their regencies demonstrated that authority could be exercised through competence, continuity, and legitimacy rather than sheer force. These precedents influenced later practices of inheritance, stewardship, and female rulership, gradually expanding the accepted boundaries of women's authority within elite society. While legal and social constraints remained, the memory of capable female governance endured, shaping expectations in times of crisis. Economically, the financial strategies employed by noblewomen during the Crusades left lasting marks on land ownership and wealth management. The use of dowries, endowments, and estate administration to fund large-scale endeavors helped normalize complex financial arrangements that would later support state-building and institutional growth. Religious foundations established or enriched by women continued to function long after the wars ended, becoming centers of education, charity, and cultural preservation. In this way, resources originally mobilized for crusading purposes were transformed into lasting social institutions. The cultural legacy of noblewomen's influence is equally significant. Through patronage of literature, art, and religious expression, they helped shape how the Crusades were remembered and interpreted. The narratives they supported emphasized faith, sacrifice, and divine purpose, themes that would dominate European historical consciousness for generations. These interpretations influenced not only medieval society but also modern perceptions of the Crusades, often obscuring the complex realities behind idealized portrayals of holy war. The marginalization of noblewomen in historical accounts is not accidental. Traditional historiography has long prioritized military action and formal political authority, domains from which women were often excluded by design. As a result, contributions that operated through finance, diplomacy, governance, and ideology were minimized or ignored. Revisiting these narratives is not an act of revisionism, but of completion. It allows history to be seen as it truly was, a product of interconnected forces, both visible and invisible. Recognizing the role of noblewomen in the Crusades also carries important implications for the present. It challenges the assumption that power must be loud, aggressive, or openly confrontational to be effective. It reveals how influence can operate through systems, relationships, and long-term vision rather than immediate force. By acknowledging these forms of power in the past, we become better equipped to identify them in the present and future. The story of the Crusades, when viewed through this broader lens, becomes more complex and more human. It is no longer a simple tale of heroes and villains, but a tapestry woven from faith, ambition, sacrifice, and survival. Noblewomen were not peripheral threads in this tapestry. They were among its primary weavers, shaping patterns that extended far beyond their own lifetimes. As this video comes to a close, the hidden architecture of the Crusades stands revealed. The wars that reshaped continents were sustained by more than armies and ideology. They were upheld by women whose influence flowed through wealth, governance, diplomacy, and belief. Their stories demand recognition, not to rewrite history, but to understand it fully. If this narrative has expanded the way you see the past, share it with someone you love. History gains meaning when it is passed on, questioned, and re-examined together. Subscribe for more sacred wars, where faith, power, and forgotten truths continue to emerge from the shadows of history.